Hey, welcome to another video on my channel. Today I'll be talking with Steve, who was a former head of engineering at Asana, and we talked about a lot of things ranging from AI, how that affects our lives, and also talking about career and how to grow. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Go ahead, watch, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See ya. So thank you very much, Steve. And like I said before we started, I really appreciate you coming on this. But I think just to like get people started, I think the first thing people would like to know about you is like, who am I talking to? Like, who am I trying to watch? So just give me a little bit of about your experience, like how you got to where you are. What are you even, or where are you currently in your career? So if we can just start with that.
Yeah, I think interesting to talk about careers. I think the easiest thing to talk about is sort of where you are in your career and where I've been until now is as a head of mobile and engagement engineering at Asana. And so been great. I have teams Vancouver, New York, San Francisco, and Poland. It's been a big journey, but this has been the last 5 years of what I've been doing, and now I'm looking towards new things in AI. But I have a 30-year career in programming. Most of that has been spent um, about 25 years professionally, because I started programming way before being a professional in the field. And I've been at Instagram, Yahoo, director at AT&T, and been also founder a couple times and been some small companies and also had a product. So I have a lot of variety from 0 to 1, middle stages, been CTO to Series C company as well, all the way through, you know, IPO and then companies way past it. So I have a lot of diversity in my background and also probably three phases of my career. I would describe it as a large phase in ad tech. Me and my team built Yahoo's mobile search marketing platform back
Interesting.
in its prime,
Yeah.
and then a big era in data systems and data systems engineering,
Mm-hmm.
doing that for in ad tech and also out of ad tech, and started a consultancy. And then post, which has been quite a bit of consumer and enterprise, travel search, Yahoo, Instagram shopping, amongst other things, Messenger, and then now most recently, enterprise, consumer-ish enterprise at Asana. So been a journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the reasons why I reached out to you because I was like, you had like so much experience with like different things, like just ranging from different things. And I think one of the things that I was gonna ask, considering that you started companies, you've also been like head of different teams and multiple teams. And I guess what is if you're gonna start from 0 to 1, say you wanted to like build you have a startup and you're thinking of what technology to use, what do you think about when choosing technologies? Like, what are the things you consider, and how do you pick what the best technology is?
There's no right answer, which sort of makes it hard. And I think, but there's three types of questions I would ask, right? In startups, if you're doing work, it really should start velocity matters. So it should start with what do you know best? Because the reality is to stop and pause and learn a new language from scratch is a lot of work. So there should be a very good reason for it. If you know something that is basically dead in industry and you're like, my best language is Perl. I've done a lot of Perl earlier in my career. I might not suggest starting there, and it may be worthwhile to reset. But that's question number one. Like, what do you know best that helps you move fast? Number two, it goes, is there a special need for the aspect you're doing? A lot of companies are doing Rust because of cross compatibility that can be embedded, speed and be embedded.
Yeah.
It is slower to develop in
Mm-hmm.
than maybe Python or like TypeScript or something. But there's some real good needs and some really good leverage if you can do that. So companies are picking that in specific cases. So is there a
Mm-hmm.
specific edge, right? And then lastly is what is recruiting going to be like? And these are double-edged swords. Some
Yeah.
companies say we really like we use some Elixir when I was CTO at tripping.com. I sort of inherited a code base there. And it cuts both ways. It's harder to find Elixir devs, but there's a passionate community and they really want to work for you because it's hard to find good Elixir jobs. So sometimes as a leader, you make a trade-off that too. You might go a little bit more niche and it may
Mm-hmm.
have some competitive advantages, um, and you may leverage that. So I think you ask these questions and put it together, but at the end of the day, you should bias for speed. And then if things are successful in the early prototyping phases and you have some sort of market fit, then you may want to consider cutting over. But that always becomes a tension.
I think it's very interesting because you said something about recruiting, and then I was thinking that say you're part of a team that is already established, and then you guys already use maybe like Python or Elixir or something. Does it matter if you're trying to hire for someone whether they know that technology or not, like generally, or does it matter the size of the organization or the size of the company? And how does that affect whether you hire people that already know the technology that you use on the team? How does that work?
I find that when you're larger at scale, it is often better and easier just, and this is what you see patterns, right? So it's not just my opinion, right? You see this
Mm-hmm.
at when I was, you know, friends at Google and their hiring process, Meta, Asana, and they don't hire for specific languages generally, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are exception roles, but the vast majority of their hiring pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
While you often see startups get pickier, and I think that follows value chains, right? So what do I mean by that? You have less dollars, you need to be more specific, you don't have as many people, and
Mm-hmm.
speed matters, right? So therefore saying, hey, I'm at a startup, we could run out of money, we have to go fast. You don't have the time to train someone up
True.
in a language.
No.
And so you're like, our code base is X. We're going to hire someone who knows X really well and is passionate and then can move faster.
Mm-hmm.
Versus when you're at a later stage public company, a lot of times they're going for quality and understanding how to work in a corporate environment. Yes, good engineer, but like, do you have fundamentals? Also, because often companies hire for the long term and projects
Yeah.
and teams may change and shift.
Mm-hmm.
There's much more higher chances of reorgs and other things. So you're like, I just need someone who's adaptable and good versus a
Mm-hmm.
startup. If you're pivoting, there's hard decisions leaders make. Sometimes founders say, and they say, no, we have to let half the team go because we're now pivoting to something new. It uses different
Mm-hmm.
technology for whatever
Yeah.
reason. And it's usually life or death, right? So you don't have much of a choice. And you're like, and they don't always make that choice. Sometimes they cross train people,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes some leaders make that choice.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that generally makes sense because I've also sort of like worked at some startups where it's just like it's easier to hire someone that can start today and start like writing code the next day, right? But if you're working at a bigger company, they wouldn't mind taking you through a boot camp or something just to get you into the code base. But that's like me on the working side. Considering that you've led different sized teams, how would you say that uh, leadership style changes based on like what size team or what size of the company is that you're working at?
It's a good question. And I think I like to look at it as like, what is the predominant needs and levers, right? If you're at a
Okay.
company that has a broken culture right now, whether big or small, you may be looking for, if you're an engineering leader, VP of Eng, you may be looking for different people to bring that culture, that stability to the organization if
Mm-hmm.
it's not there. Um, and 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 I think it's all critical thinking, right? And I think if you're a good leader, you're mapping to the exact needs that you have and making trade-offs, right? For example, even at a large company, in a large team, we may not hire for things, but mobile teams, right? For example, we're hiring specifically for iOS and like
Yeah.
Android and like our stack,
Mm-hmm.
which compared to some of the web teams is more specific. Like we do a little bit more pruning, but even then we say, if we have a deep enough deficit, we say, do we need another specific set of skills? For example, is it someone more of a product builder or someone more of a foundational skills? And so I think as a leader, you always need to be critically aware of what's bringing value and trying to
Mm-hmm.
estimate of what's missing.
Mm-hmm.
And especially on small teams, you'd be like, what skills do we have? I'll give you an example from when I was at Tripping. Um, we didn't have enough DevOps. And so what I noticed when I joined the company, I joined a CTO, we had a VP of Eng who grew the engineering team from zero to what we had then. And it was,
Yeah.
I think when I joined, it was about 30 something, and we
Yeah.
grew it a little further still.
Mm-hmm.
And but I noticed, you also get snow blind. Sometimes when you're in it every day, you get a little bit snow blind. And
Yeah.
the VP of engineering was very good, but he sort of like didn't notice a trend that was going on. And what I noticed was right away, all the senior engineers were the DevOps engineers. And so so then we had a bunch of mid and early career folks, and they didn't do any DevOps, and they were the slowest. So we had our most talented engineers just keeping the site live.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what are we doing here? This is not good leverage. So then we ended up bringing on, you know, two DevOps engineers to take that over and then free up the time of our senior engineers. Not just free up the time, but also put different systems in place to
Mm-hmm.
like increase velocity. And so, you know, either case, when I've done mobile, like at Asana, or I've had teams over. I rebuilt a whole team from scratch at Instagram, which was Instagram metrics team, and it there was no engineers, there was no handoff, which you think would be very surprising in a company the size of Meta, but like everyone had left, so no one had any context, and I had to build it from scratch. So I optimized for some very senior leaders, and I
Mm-hmm.
got some pushback from my leadership chain because they're like, "There's not the scope," and I'm like, "I'm not staffing for scope. I'm staffing for risk."
Yeah.
And I think constantly you'd be like, "Okay, what do you really need?" And then you optimize for that, right? You have to pull levers, and I think that's the way I sort of view it.
Yeah, so I think like if I get you correctly, it's mostly just like adapting to what you need, and just like it's not a one size fit all. It's like depending on what you need and just adapting to that. I think one thing that I wanted us to go back to was when you were doing like your introduction about your career journey. You were like you now trying to look more into getting into AI. And I was checking your LinkedIn and I saw that you actually did a course in AI in like 2018 before the old buzz at MIT. So I wanted to know, like, what is your thought about AI? Because I think this talk is going to be incomplete if we don't talk about AI because everybody talks about AI. So, and I know you also talk a lot about that on LinkedIn. So, like, what is your thought about AI? General thought.
It's a good question. I think some it's this is a much bigger leap in AI than it has affected the world in a long time, and I think not everyone realizes it. And you sometimes see hype cycles, and do you think it's a hype cycle? And I think this time it's real. There's a lot there. There
Okay.
will be a lot of things that fail, but there's a lot of real there to this generation of AI. But there's a lot that's not new, right? Like part of how I got into software and excited by it was um, loved Lisp, loved Lisp programming. Followed it very early in my career when I was in like junior high, in in the late '80s, early '90s, and the and it was old then, right?
Yeah.
But like all the famous AI programmers were writing things in Lisp,
Hmm.
and if you go to the history and some of the things that were invented then, early neural networks and things like that, the behavioral things were the same. Some people still fought it, didn't trust it. And then you've now seen generations of AI technology come out, right? And there've been different waves. And so there was a bunch of the AI algorithms that were in use and early versions of neural nets. And goes like in the 2000s, but you've seen like a resurgence of improved technology every decade or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've lived through that now a couple times. And so I've seen like, oh, there's a new wave of AI.
Yeah.
And, it was, more labeled machine learning and data mining. And then it
Mm-hmm.
became a version with big data AI algorithms. And I did a lot in the big data space. I was a top architect for that in that space while it was hot with Hadoop and HBase
Yeah.
Cassandra.
Yeah.
And then then it moved on to like another generation where they had a lot of algorithms you were building at scale, Spark
Yeah.
and Flink and things like that. And then they moved to, you know, uh, deep learning, right? The deep
Mm-hmm.
learning wave
Mm-hmm.
came in, and that was the precursor right before the LLM wave,
Yeah.
right? So I think what people are missing that haven't been in this space, and I've been in each generation to a
Mm-hmm.
degree, more as an
Yeah.
applied computer scientist than
Yeah.
as a researcher. I like I've been advising a startup, so this is a little long-winded. But
Mm-hmm.
like, so to me, it's old hat. The fact that there are wave after wave after wave, and you see how
Yeah.
it gets adopted and crashed.
Yeah.
And but the behavioral mechanisms that are important for product design haven't changed. And so, for example, I'm advising a friend who's new COO of a startup, and
Okay.
he's newer to the AI space. And I was talking to him. I said, look, you want to position a lot of this as technology that will help the people, and this is in the construction and drafting industry,
I see.
and not take jobs. And I
Mm.
said there's a variety of reasons for this. The maturity of your technology, the accuracy is not going to be perfect. You have
Mm-hmm.
to ask yourself the question of what percentage of inaccuracy is even acceptable. And sometimes people think, oh, it's good 97% of the time. A lot of times it needs to be good 99.9% of the
Nine.
time, or
Yeah.
people don't trust
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
they're like, but humans aren't that good. It doesn't
But it's
matter.
like it doesn't matter.
It,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Like, just
Yeah.
people then stop trusting it and stop
Yeah.
using it. And some people hate the concept, and some people are just afraid of losing their job. So I
Mm-hmm.
said, instead of positioning your product, and this is without not even talking to his customers or market, and
Mm-hmm.
just because I've seen this happen before, I'm like,
Yeah.
there's a number of aspects that we can go through that you should position your product. They go to
Mm-hmm.
market and they started talking to customers deeper after he joined. This is a couple months later. And he's like,
Yeah.
like us, how's it going? He's like, we're getting objections. And I'm like, why? And he goes through like all three of those things. And I'm like, I'm not super surprised.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
seen this happen before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think while people are talking about agents and replacing entire teams and staffing,
Yeah.
and some
Yeah.
of that will
Yeah.
occur,
Mm-hmm.
I view this is going to be a lot of sticky value, especially as this technology is maturing,
Mm-hmm.
is developing, as
Yeah.
being things that aid humans and let them do more critical thinking and get rid of some of the tedious things that
Grunt work
AI can
that we
help you
do.
with.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense. I mean, I have this is me asking a lot of questions. So I think one thing that I want, I also like just got into because I'm way, way younger. I got into like the AI space in the like the big data learn and the deep learning cycle. And now it seems like at least LLM was the talk of last year, and now we're talking about agents and how now they can do things for us. But I am curious about what do you think with this current wave, how far do you think we can get? And it's also like, what do we need to make AI better? Like, let's talk about LLMs or even agents. Like, do we need more data? Do we need more compute power? Because, like you said, I think the reason why we have better AI now is because of all the other technologies that we've had over the years. Now we have cloud infrastructure that allow us like deploy things like at scale. And I'm thinking like, how do we get like something better, and how better do you think we can get?
I think this is a very nuanced subject.
Yeah.
And I'll give you sort of my half skeptical view. Like, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
get very good. But I think
Okay.
people talk about AGI and better than humans. But I'm like, software's been better than humans for ages. It all
Ages.
depends what you mean, right?
Mm.
It's for decades, right? Like, how good are people at basic math? We've had calculators, right? Before there was
Yeah.
slide rules and like,
Mm-hmm.
manual calculations. It's been better than humans, most humans, right? There's some like very gifted ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is no different. And I think the problem is that, you have people talking about, artificial general intelligence. But I think sometimes people are being a little bit, sometimes benefit of the doubt, I'll say they're being like highly optimistic and viewing it with a certain lens. I think sometimes maybe being slightly more nefarious and sort of twisting the words to the way they want to do it for their own benefit. And I think there's a spectrum of from honest folks to dishonest folks, and I think in any flavor, it depends what you mean by intelligence. And to be able to retrieve, synthesize, and pull quotes from thousands of books, like you see like genius characters on a movie, right? And it's going to be able to do that every day long, all day long, every day,
That's for
right?
sure. Yeah.
And people aren't going to be able to do that. So you'd be like, it's smarter than every human being practically on the planet. But then can it common sense, like, I don't know, you gotta take care of some toddlers and, no, you gotta eat
Yeah.
because they're gonna get hangry. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll guess that. Maybe it won't. But there's going to be a human element of things that it doesn't get in commonsensical ways. And we will expose it to more data and it will have more common sense. And these technologies will integrate new patterns of real-time updating and real-time memory, which we're leveraging context for like real-time knowledge, because it can't update itself in real time. So we just throw
Yeah.
more of it to churn through.
Mm-hmm.
It's all going to get better. I don't know how far it'll get. My suspicion, like understanding some of the math, right, and also listening to a lot of other experts on the papers,
Mm-hmm.
is I don't believe it would get to general intelligence the way you or I, as a human, would have general intelligence. I think it will do some amazing things, um, but it won't get there. And I would say just anecdotal proof. Look at the market. Why would the founders of OpenAI, so many of them have left if they're on the verge of exactly that? My life's work is to create artificial general intelligence. They've left to start other company. There's been some drama there, but like they've left to
Yeah.
start other companies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would you do that? I think it's a phenomenal company. I think they're doing
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal work and amazing
Yeah.
things along with Anthropic and a number of other companies. But, people have this conversation. Would you leave on the verge of your life's work? I don't know. Like too
Yeah.
many people have left to say like
Yeah.
that's likely at this point, I would say.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, apart from the drama, I think you would still like consider like if we're about to reach AGI, why would I leave? But I think one thing that I was just thinking about right now is like I watch so many talks and like even Nvidia CEO, OpenAI, and like all the CEOs and everybody, nobody, or I mean, there's the marketing part of thing because like most of them have companies that are creating things in AI, but not a lot of people really talk about what the negative impact might be. And I wanted to know if you've thought about that. Like, we're all talking about how it can make our lives better, and we are not talking about like some of the dangers that we can have. Maybe it's gonna be like Matrix, right? Like, so have you thought about that as someone that is a leader in the industry and you're trying to like go more into that space?
I think Anthropic is probably doing the most responsible job of any company in the space, and I applaud them and appreciate it. I mean, there are
Mm-hmm.
others, and you know, I don't think there's enough ethical leaders in companies broadly, and this is something I would like to see more of, people to stand up for, not political causes, but sort of doing what's right. It might
Yeah.
cost the bottom line, but not
Mm-hmm.
do some level of pollution or, you know, treat people inhumanely and like
Mm-hmm.
eat into those bottom lines at times to do the right thing. And I think the same, what I'm hoping for is it will have leaders at companies that do AI and spend the extra time to prevent bad things from happening, right? To focus on what is ethical, what is responsible. And we're also going to need some help from government because over and over again, as much as a lot of people say, deregulate everything, the problem is always attention. I'm going to do as an aside, in my soapbox. Regulation can go out of hand bad and regulation can go good. And what happens
Yeah.
is people paint a paintbrush because there is bad regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they just need to be fixed. Sometimes it'd be actually good to remove some because they're not doing the job they intended,
Mm-hmm.
or they're political fodder. But getting rid of all regulations isn't
Brilliant.
good either. We've seen how millions of people have been hurt around the world in various governments. And so, this is going to have to be a public private, efforts to make AI safe. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how much pain there'll be in the journey there. I think there's going to be people that lose their jobs. There is
Mm-hmm.
going to be pain, and there will be jobs that go away. Even in, I would say just my lifetime, there are roles that no longer exist as roles 100 years ago. There used to be, you know, people that lit lanterns, a whole series of jobs. You just lit lanterns on streetlights at
Yeah.
night and things like that. They
Yeah.
don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Milk delivery, but not even that. You go, I forget, it's like 200 years ago or 150 years ago, like 90% of Americans were in agriculture,
Yeah.
and now it's some single digit number in agriculture.
Yeah.
The world will change. People will have jobs. It'll move on. We'll just see how painful it ends up being. I have no idea.
Yeah. And I think like with every sort of like like every sort of like economic revolution, there's always like change in jobs. When we had the industrial revolution, there were like people had to move from like using whatever they were using to using in like machines and stuff, and some people had to lose their jobs. And I was going to like just last touching point on AI before we move to something else is like, how what kind of jobs do you think is going to be left? But more so, it's more like a software engineer still going to have jobs. Like, what in terms of like tech jobs, what kind of jobs or what can we look? What should we start thinking about in terms of like outlook for jobs in tech?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, oh, some people, the software engineer is dead. I'm like, that's absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
It's- I mean, it does, it might, I don't know, it could be true that half the software engineering jobs go away. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not clear if they get replaced by brand different type of software engineering jobs
No.
or not at all, right?
Yeah.
That is hard to tell. I think that part of the future, but I think that they're completely going to go away is like not completely not true.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because there used to be lots of craftspeople building all sorts of physical goods
Mm-hmm.
until you got to like Henry Ford and mass produce and like interchangeable
Yeah.
parts. And a lot of what AI is building today is equivalent of handcrafted parts. They're not interchangeable. And the way most software engineers build things is generally in repeatable, replaceable patterns. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean you can't teach AI to do these things, but
Mm-hmm.
today the AI doesn't know how to do it this way. And so, you see it in memes. There are memes like, oh, I used to spend 90% of my time like writing code and 10%
Yeah.
debugging, and now it's like vice
Mm-hmm.
versa.
Mm-hmm.
People can't maintain these things. And if you don't
Yeah.
know how it works, you can't figure out. It's like, if you take a skill that maybe if you were also a mechanic and someone handed you a car that you've never seen before and you're used to BMWs and Mercedes or something,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're like throwing something new, you're like, now I need to stop, figure it all. It's not efficient, it's not fast.
Yeah.
It's totally possible, but then you're like have to learn, I don't know if it's Toyotas or whatever car like manufacturers like extremely different in sort of their internal designs or Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
But that's happening with AI because now people are like, I built this whole system. Can you add this bolt on this new part to change this feature? And people are like,
Yeah.
for things that have started from scratch. And so I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really good for POCs. And actually, the way I like to use AI is for very specific, I sort of almost view it as print on demand.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can now make individual parts. And I don't think it's good to like use it. And you wouldn't try to use a 3D printer to print an entire car. Maybe someone will
Mm-hmm.
try. But definitely use it. People are using various these machines to build individual parts or parts that
Mm-hmm.
no longer get manufactured and have individual replacement. And in software land, I like very specific components, and I'm like, you can do it from scratch. And also, like, there's been certain movements of people that want to not remove dependencies. Now you can be like, instead, AI, build me that small function, and I'm going to have my own version of it and not require some library.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm reducing my dependency set in my software stack.
Okay, interesting. I know I said that was going to be the last question on AI, but like this, while you were just talking, I was like, uh, what AI tools do you use on a day to day? Like, just briefly, like, what are the top AI tools that you use as a leader in tech?
As in, I mean, I unfortunately have like hundreds of dollars of subscriptions at this point.
Oh no, jeez.
It's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
I'll eventually figure out which, like, some of the innovation will peel down and I'll cut some of them. But for example, I have I use almost every day, and it switches over time. Like this changes sometimes by the month and the features are released. I use Perplexity. I have Anthropic's Claude. I have subscription to Gemini and um, uh, OpenAI, right? Just in like the general chat bot. And I have
Yeah.
like developer accounts for all of those as well. Um, then for developer tools, I love and I hate this new terminal program called Warp. And so it's an
Oh,
AI
okay.
first terminal program. And they've done some very cool things with it. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
totally different experience. And parts of it I like, parts of it I'm like, this is annoying. But as an AI first terminal, it's very interesting. IDEs, play around with a lot of them. So again, ByteDance released Trey recently, so that's a new
Okay.
one. Zed is the new Rust-based IDE.
Mm-hmm.
I use it on, I've replaced my notepads with it because it opens really fast and it can actually integrate GitHub Copilot.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Day to day, my favorite is actually bounces between for full just IDE generally is Windsurf and Cursor.
Okay.
The hype I know is like Cursor wins, but I found Windsurf to be better than Cursor. Um, Especially the last release or two that they've had.
Mm-hmm.
I find it superior. And then there's all sorts of other tools. Automations N8N. I like it for prototyping before turning into code. And then Framework Stack. Um, Little known, but awesome. The founders are fantastic. I've also invested in them, so call me biased, but I think this is going to be their YC company, Boundary ML, and they basically provided modern tooling for modern tooling around prompting. So basically, you know, no one would go back to like doing React code without hot reloading and linting types and all this kind of stuff. So they've
Mm-hmm.
added basically hot reloading to prompts so you can in your IDE see full hydrated prompts because usually people when they get to advanced prompts you're like appending lots of things and
Yeah.
injecting
Yeah.
lots of things.
Yeah.
So you don't actually know what's there. You have to imagine what's there. So they have hot
Mm.
reloading for that. They also have linting, formatting that doesn't hurt the prompts um, and type checking. So it's a great stack, and they have a lot of other things beyond that. That's just sort of the dev tooling. It's all free. It's
Mm-hmm.
all open source. They've
Yes.
done a fantastic job. And then Llama Index, I think, is fantastic, along with LangGraph and Copilot Kit. If for the visual side, they've done a lot of things to make UIs fast. So there's just so many frameworks out there. It's very hard to keep up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean, I
I
think
could go
that's
on
the
and on.
yeah.
So.
I think that's the interesting thing about like tech in general is like just too many things, like too many things to keep track of, and like everybody's like building something on top of the existing technologies, which is very nice. And like you said, I think that's how we get the best tech, and then we weed out the ones that don't survive. But yeah, that's like very good talk about AI. We might, anyways. So now more to more career talk. Just straight out of the way, what do you think makes a good software engineer?
A good software engineer, I think a lot of it is it's extremely helpful if you're detail oriented and curious, right? Those two are a killer combination because so many things in tech are about the details, like learning your craft, and then there's going to be this pushback, and you see these debates and the number of posts about like, are software engineers dead? There was a recent research paper from Microsoft being like critical thinking is going down amongst people
Yeah,
using
yeah, I
AI.
saw
And
that.
they're not the only one. There's a few papers like this. And then a number of people speculating that we're only going to have senior engineers that are using AI, and then we're going to like fire all the junior and mid-level engineers.
Yeah.
And then, and some people even have like projected out estimates of when it'll occur, like 10 years from now, that'll be like an engineer famine. And so, to get, sorry, not to, this is a detour, but not to answer your
That's
question,
okay.
is
Yeah.
like what makes a good engineer is going to be this curiosity, right? Because if you're just sort of like leaning on AI and just getting answers and you're never curious about how it actually works, you're going to have a very shallow understanding. And then basically, you're not as effective. And so when you talk about people that are staff and principal engineers, a lot of times they know things. Like I started my career doing IT help desk. And so then I went to racking and stacking servers and crimping cables and understanding how to build them. And then I did, building PC. I also did on the side building PCs, and I made
Yeah.
websites from scratch. And so I grew my career that, and then eventually got into my first programming job. And then from, various languages and moved my way up through the full tech stack. And, part of that I was learning reading textbooks and like going through all the material on how Linux worked and the OS and how the kernels worked and drivers and all these things. And it's rare to find people that have gone through the full tech stack on up. Um, and I think you're going to see this eventually if some of these projections do come true, you're going to see scarcity in real experts, and their value is going to go through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also very interesting, and I was just smiling when you were talking about like how you went from like crimping to cables, cause that was like a similar thing that I did also. Like before I went deep into like programming, I did like an internship kind of thing for like 6 months at my school's IT department. So we're like managing the school server, and we go crimp table, we go like stack racks, and just so that was like very interesting. But yeah, I think one thing that I was going to ask from that is how, considering that you have like this years of experience in tech, how does a person get from like junior engineer to an intermediate engineer to senior to staff, stuff like what are what's the progression like, and what are the skills that differ or that you need to grow in to like grow in your career, like your career ladder more or less.
I think there's a curse of knowledge for older engineers teaching people new to the industry. And I think there's also a biased perspective for people that are earlier in their career in software engineering. And you hear about it talked about, usually like the entire focus, because it's viewed as the hard part, the bottleneck is the hard skills. Do I know how to
Mm,
program? Do I know how to use a command line? Do I know how to use cloud computing of various sorts, right? Um, and it's about just knowing the hard tech. And what gets lost is what usually holds people back after you get a baseline is soft skills, right? What is critical judgment of what the business needs? Do you understand what the business needs? Do you understand how to get along with other people, right? Because to do what the business needs, you need to be able to collaborate and get along with other people. How are your communication skills? Maybe you don't get into arguments with folks, but like you don't know how to communicate effectively your points. I know I've not been perfect, and I've taken time throughout my career to learn it. I actually became an engineer to avoid writing, which was, some people view as ludicrous. I
yeah.
hated it and I wanted to avoid it. Um, but then eventually I got to a point in my career where I got a writing tutor, and I was like every week with my writing tutor because I'm like, this is something I need to improve. And so, not everyone has that challenge, but I'd say as you progress, it goes from hard skills to soft skills, and you need to continue with the hard skills. But usually it's easier to put energy towards the hard skills if you've already done it than the soft skills. And because you need a good feedback loop, you need peers, coaches, mentors to really help you get through that. And that's what it takes. And not everyone is built by personality or by circumstance to get to, for example, the highest rungs of, like distinguished engineer, because that's your
Yeah.
like probably highly specialized writing papers.
Mm-hmm.
The moon and the stars need to come together, and then you're like talking at conferences, right? But it's not uncommon for people to become senior engineers, right? That's pretty typical. Like everyone can do that if you're in software engineering. And I would say, you know, work on your hard skills, but always be asking, where could my soft skills use work?
Mm-hmm.
And try to keep that balance. And I think people that are most successful are able to do a strong balance between the two.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Like, The more like the last question that I have written down before all the other questions is that we've talked about how fast things move in tech, and I was wondering how you stay updated. Also considering that you also have a full time job, and you're like you have to still do your job, but you also need to know stuff, right? How do you stay updated in tech?
Um, I think this is where people have sometimes unfair competitive advantages. I love it. So my hobby is this, right? And so if you're not just personally interested in tech and platforms and things,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to spend all your free time outside of work keeping up. Since I have a passion for it, that is my hobby. I enjoy it. And so I keep up by every year I pick a new technology challenge. Like, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago was like React when I didn't know React. And it's like, okay, I'm going to do work on React sites and learn all the fundamentals. And every few
Mm-hmm.
years I pick a project. That's one thing that I do. And I'm always keeping up of where do I have gaps. Like for a long time early career, I was mostly back end and I knew HTML and I knew some CSS and I knew some front end. I'd done some like Java applets and I've done actually like Flash and ActionScript and stuff like that. So I knew Flash, but it was never a large portion of my career. And then eventually I was like, oh, I need to know this. And I started learning Figma. And, I just like always like, oh, where is my gap in skills? And I pick up a new set. Like right now, I've done a lot of applied AI for a long time. And I look at applying it to new UI, UX principles and like where people are doing good innovations and bad innovations. And I think what's hard is it's costly to do user interface innovations and you don't know if they'll pay off.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm constantly trying to take inspiration for that on an applied side of AI. And then from an execution, I'm getting my hands dirty, um, both in TypeScript and I don't have tons of experience with TypeScript because didn't use it as much as I've used a lot of Python. So
Mm-hmm.
AI industry is deep in Python, so that's made my life easy. And I'm just experimenting. I'm like, you know, how does BAML work for boundary ML? What is Llama Index? Working with LangChain, where do these frameworks overlap?
Mm-hmm.
And then monitoring which ones are gaining momentum. And there's a lot of like these agent flow frameworks. There's going to be a lot of them that die. Um,
Mm-hmm.
between Crew AI, which has a sort of more of a declarative sort of version of things,
Yeah.
to other things like LangGraph is more graph based, and there's others that have different flavors. And
Yeah.
there's one I can't remember the tip of my tongue, which is a very interesting framework because they've built a graphical user interface that feels like um, a web-based interface that you can like configure things like an N8N or a make.com or
Interesting.
one of these,
Yeah.
but they actually give you all the underlying code. So it does code generation and then you can modify it freely. So you can get the quick
Nice.
configuration to get things down
Mm-hmm.
and then sort of scale it up post that and it generates Python. And I
Interesting.
think TypeScript as well. I'll have to look up and send you that framework when I find it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm glad to check into that. Interesting. So, are there like books that you would recommend, or also like newsletters that you read every other day, or like that you're subscribed to?
I'm subscribed to too many. I'm like subscribed about to 12 AI newsletters. So I like
Oh
I get
Lord.
I get substantial news. I don't think it matters. I think pick one. A lot of the better
Yeah.
ones have a lot of overlap in their content. And I would say pick one that you identify with. There's some that are
Mm-hmm.
like Sebastian, I forget his last name, PhD in AI, and it's like very deep into the tech, his Substack, into how LLMs work and
Yeah.
their mechanisms, right? And if you're just new to programming, I don't recommend that probably. Like it's not a place to start.
Yeah.
Um, or you're a casual business learner that wants to follow versus some that are sort of more bubblegum, like who got
Mm-hmm.
funding and what are
Yeah.
the features that are out this week,
Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's probably a better way to keep up. But I'd say there's the one thing I have 100% certainty with AI is markets and industries and jobs are going to change, a lot of them. And so it is important for people to be educating themselves and being ready to adapt. And I don't think most people are going to predict all of the ways So between software engineering or customer success or all sorts of jobs are going to change, but they will. And people need to be prepared to integrate AI tools into how they work and operate. And in some cases, people will need to adapt to completely new jobs. And I think people should be keeping their eyes open and ready for that. And what I'm hoping, like from to our earlier comments, I hope the Anthropics of the world win out into
Yeah.
responsibly integrating AI, because people don't like change, and to being forced to, like, your job goes away and be forced to take a new job, and maybe the beginning of your career, maybe the end. Either way, it's painful and it's going to suck. And you didn't make that choice. It's being forced upon you, and it will happen to people. So, as much as we can be responsible to society to try to take care of people and to make it suck less and have a little compassion, I think that's something that's important as we go into what's guaranteed change in our lifetime, right? That's something I can say with 100% confidence.
Yeah, that's very nice. I think one before we like get to the Q&A thingy, one last thing that I wanted to ask is like, is there something that you wanted us that you would have loved us to talk about that we didn't talk about like in the long conversation that we had?
I think I'd love to talk to other engineering leaders. And I've seen a lot of people do a bad job at training their teams in AI. And they're not really making the investments they should. And I've talked with a number of leaders and try to put a program like this in place at Asana, where we get people to more deliberately be trained. And it's not just buying the tools. And some companies are not willing to buy the tools. It's getting people to have conversations about what's working, what's not, because there's not a lot of expertise out there. And it's about the behavioral change. If you just get used to, instead of opening VS Code every day, you're
Yeah,
opening whatever tool set, and you're having different people in the team actively try new tool sets because they're changing by the week, literally by the week. And their releases are crazy and new tools are coming out all the time. That as an engineering leader, I believe in having dedicated focus in accelerating your teams through very explicit and deliberate AI training. And I'd say
mm,
if you want to keep your company and your teams to be competitive, you should be doing that. You should be saying, how do we talk about AI tooling every day? And how do I have someone on the team rotating to try something
yeah,
new? Because the Swim's got some interesting AI backed documentation tooling. They've been in this space for a long time, but it is very good. I still think it has a ways to go in some use cases of looking at other tools like this. Is going to be more unit testing tools, QA tools, and
mm-hmm,
these things will all accelerate teams. But it's hard to say who the winners are. It's too early for
yeah,
that. And we're going to see some be early winners and then become losers. And so a lot of experimentation
yeah.
is going to be necessary.
Yeah, that was the word that I was going to say if you did not say. It's like there needs to be like lots of experimentation, but I think I'm also thinking there needs to be that balance, which you probably mentioned, but like I just wanted to reiterate is that there should be some specific set of people on some team that are always trying out new things, and if those technologies end up working out, they can then be integrated more with the rest of the old team. So, but yeah, that's like some very. I've enjoyed the conversation so far, anyway. So, and I really hope you have. But I have just 5 questions that people have. I've asked like on. So let's get into it. I think the first one, which is interesting, is how do you measure an engineer's value and how do you measure a team's efficiency?
Uh, Values by what they ship. At the end of the day, engineering teams are about shipping. And I, th- I've had some, spicy conversations with like some other senior VPs at like different companies, and There's some people that are strong believers in like using jellyfish and having like strong instrumentation on every engineer and what they're doing and not doing.
Mm-hmm.
Others don't like that. And I think there's many ways to manage teams. But at the end of the day, as a leader, you're responsible to keep them high performance,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of which path to get there. And my belief to measure engineers you know, is to look at like what is expected and can someone ship, and
Mm.
putting people in a path to success at what's expected. Because as a leader, you want to get as much done as possible for the business.
Yeah.
And then you also want to be smart about it. And there is true, if you're at a startup versus a larger company needs to think about a longer term horizon and career paths and growing redundancy and growing people's careers from
Mm-hmm.
earlier phases. And there are some startups that take early career and are very successful with those people, but not every startup takes that philosophy. And so I think as a leader, again, tailor to the culture and environment you're trying to shoot for, and then be honest with it. And so, so for example, it is harsh, but if you're running a startup and you're only going to hire senior engineers and people don't keep up with the other senior engineers, that new engineer is not going to make it. It's just, and you have to let them go. And the way you measure that, right, is, either through high instrumentation or through just deliverables and say, are people delivering? And either way is fine. Um, I prefer to have trust and focus on like moving the needle, um, rather than strong instrumentation, because I think those things get gamed and can waste energy at times. There are times where it's necessary, not to say I have no data, but that's my preferred way.
Okay. And what about like team efficiency? How do you measure whether members of a team are working together efficiently?
From collaboration perspective, I think the because they already know the team is shipping or not shipping and are like have
Yeah.
driving deliverables. So as a team working well together, that just becomes part of management, right? And getting to know your
Mm.
people and having conversations like, are people infighting, backstabbing, or other terrible things? Or are people developing psychological safety, trust,
Mm.
able to challenge each other and push each other? Um, because you want a team that helps each other be better,
Mm-hmm.
cares and looks out for one another, and helps people up their game, right? And that's a hard environment to build, and that's where good leaders come in.
Okay. Awesome. That's very good. I have a very interesting one. And this person is like, how what's the fastest way to become head of engineering? Like the fastest time possible.
Fastest time, become a founder. That's the fastest. Like
Oh, okay.
if you want the fastest time possible to become a founder, right?
That's
Uh,
fair.
you may or may not be successful, but that is the absolute fastest way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that assumes in your friend group you're the strongest technical lead and get agreement to becoming founder. But outside of that, I think, you know, it's also startups, right? It's like developing the ability to execute and deliver quickly, right? And then manage people to do the same. And so if you're going to do a startup and join them as head of engineering and a Series C, Series A, you know, typically it's not based on your management skill. And
Yeah.
if you have some, the people usually want to see it is based on the ability when you're on a 0 to 1 first 5 people team. It's like who's the strongest engineer? And the strongest engineer is usually the person that can be the most versatile and ship the most.
Okay. Awesome. That's very good way to think about it. That's very interesting. Uh Second to the last question, which is if you were to start your career all over to get to this level, what are the things that you would do differently?
And so do different. It's a good question. Uh, it's probably nothing I'd do differently per se in my career. I think it's been interesting because I've usually followed challenges, and so I've gone from big to small and big to small a few times. Um, there are ways I'd probably optimize dollars and differently. Quite frankly, startups are not always the most fiscally
Responsible.
rewarding companies,
Okay.
right? Like that knows
Yeah.
you're not maximizing dollars necessarily being in
Yeah.
startups. You're sometimes maximizing learning, you're maximizing experiences. So if I wanted to make more dollars, I'd probably spend more time at FANG companies than I already have. Um, but I don't think I would have made that choice personally.
Okay, awesome. That's interesting. I like that. Last question, which is like if you're managing uh, organizing teams, do you need to, for example, you were head of mobile and then you were also managing like a web team. And when you were talking about the fact that you're just picking up front end technologies that most of your experience has been with back end. Do you have to know all the technologies that is being used in all the teams if you're managing like a group of teams or even in your team?
Now, because part of leadership is knowing how to ask the right questions. The more technologies you know, obviously, the more helpful it is, and the better it is. But you're never going to know everything, even if you know a lot. I have a very, very broad base, but I've learned from other leaders that the questions you ask and how you ask them and how you keep people accountable matters a lot. And that matters more as a leader than knowing the specific technologies, though it is extremely helpful. That being said, I've been on the record before that leaders, for example, that don't learn the fundamentals of AI and can't extrapolate and make critical decision making around AI or
Mm,
or other technologies are going to get burned, right? Then you're relying on luck that other people make good decisions around you
yeah,
and you're not adding value. I
yeah.
think that's a dangerous place to be and not one that I want to be in my career.
Awesome. That's a good way to end the whole conversation. But like, thank you very much, Steve, for like this chat. I I'm hoping you enjoyed talking to me,
I
cause
did.
I
It's
did.
been a good conversation.
Yeah, cause I did, and I'm hoping that if I ever reach out again, you'll be like, yeah, let's get on a call again. But any final thing you wanted to say before we end the call?
Um, we're in the call. Uh, Nothing right now, but if you did enjoy this conversation, feel to follow me on TikTok. I have a
Yeah.
TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and
Okay.
if you want to throw it on the description of this podcast,
Oh
that'd be
yeah,
great.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna throw like he shares like very insightful knowledge. I didn't know you create content on Instagram, so I'm for sure gonna follow you. So I'm gonna drop that in the description. Like, subscribe, follow, and thank you very much.